Hello there, everybody. My name is Brian Schwager. I'm the founder of Wellness Movement Services, and I want to thank you for clicking on this link and your interest in discovering what are the four principles to wellness and movement. I've come to understand in my 35 plus years in this industry that it's pretty obvious that if you're not feeling well, you're not moving well. Now, I started out in this career as a personal trainer, strength conditioning coach, exercise specialist. And I maximize my understanding on exercise now into corrective exercise, therapeutic exercise, mindful exercise, all the way up to high performance training. In 1994, I branched out into more of a mind body approach. I believe that there should be a holistic approach to enhancing one's performance because I was still training athletes in 1994 heavily, but I also was embracing a more holistic approach. Now, this is a slide from another presentation, but I think it serves us well to understand that the difference between holistic and holistic. So, holistic with an H refers to all sorts of alternative therapies, like I have listed here, homeopathy, Chinese or Ayurvedic medicine. These could be chiropractic, they could be acupuncture, massage therapy, yoga, and other Eastern or mind-body approaches to movement, and other things as well. But holistic means mind, body, and spirit. And that's where things started to come together for me and looking at the whole person. And then I started to hook up with various types of practitioners. I was aligned with orthopedic doctors, physical therapists that were open-minded, acupuncture, various types of behavioral services that dealt with the emotional part, a wide variety of body work. Got into a little bit of homeopathy with some practitioners, herbal medicines, and then stumbled across naturopathic doctors and got into nutrition. And I saw that it was important to combine all of this into my service. So I was addressing it to the best of my ability. And I would always give good advice when it came to removing the negatives, taking the things out of a person's kitchen, their eating plan that, is causing them more inflammation or more toxicity. And then when in doubt, I would always refer out for further assistance. So the naturopath would take over from there, the chiropractor would take over from there, the acupuncturists, herbal doctors, etc. But you could see that that idea was coming to fruition, and it was really the only approach that was working. Throughout the 90s, I'm 63, so my clients were about the same age as myself, most of them. And their primary concern was to avoid the health challenges their parents had. Like myself, I didn't want to have the same health challenges my parents had. They unfortunately died really young from cancer and heart disease, and this was still growing. And it was perplexing. And orthopedic issues were growing throughout the 90s. And no matter what we did, and gosh knows that we tried a lot of different things, it just wasn't working. Um, so I had to get creative in my services back even in the 90s. We were overwhelmed back then, and we still are with managing chronic physical and mental illness and is failing to keep us healthy. The system we have is failing. And we all have, with all the advancements in medical technology, orthopedic and primary care medicine, the physical therapy and occupational areas are all well educated by now. Advanced studies in medicine, health, fitness, corrective exercise, and different things that can help people to mitigate pain and improve health. But the one thing I see that is still missing even today is we're really not looking at the cause. We're still treating symptoms. And we all know in Western medicine that you take a med to treat the symptom. Okay, time and place for that, I guess. But even today, people are reaching for the latest vitamin, the latest treatment. And I think to me personally, you're still reaching at a symptom-based analogy. So it's not much different than what we're doing in Western medicine. And, over the past 30 years, the concept of wellness has been increasingly embraced by communities, schools, workplaces, healthcare providers in the United States and abroad. Yet the current state of our health and well-being is still declining. I began to scratch my head in the late 90s, and that's what prompted me to go back to school. So when I applied a holistic approach, even in the 90s, my clients got long-term relief because we were working on the cause. How many people out there are just sick and tired of their back pain or their illness, right? How many people would like to just get to the cause of it? And, all my clients in the 90s, they came to me because they wanted to get fit. So you have to feel well to move well. That's why I worked holistically in the 90s. So I went back to school, relocated to North Carolina, and I was very fortunate to not only work with a functional nutritionist, this chiropractor, let me just say this chiropractor was a functional neurologist and a functional nutritionist. So now I can get specific because he could recommend blood work, be very specific for the individual. And we can do other testing, urine testing, saliva, and also stool samples. And we really started to address fungal parasites, imbalances, inflammatory issues. And I really began to learn a lot from him. Here I was looking at now various aspects of a person's lifestyle. Let me just say this, lifestyle. Something else that I learned about 4 years ago in a webinar taught by a physical therapist on corrective exercise, basically. And they were talking about the 10 musculo health risk factors. And look at number 6. Now, in the 90s, that wasn't part of the health risk factor. It wasn't mentioned that way. So lifestyle, and that's what we're looking at here. And that's what we began to focus on at the chiropractic center where I worked, Advanced Chiropractic Center. And then when I moved out on my own in 2009, that's when I started to put the pieces together. And the first thing we needed to do was rate your wellness. Now, I was already rating movement. I'm real big on assessment. If you're not assessing, you're guessing. I never guess when it comes to designing an exercise program for anybody, especially if they are doing correctives. I need data. I need to look at posture. I need to look at movement, comparative range of motion. I'll need to do applied kinesiology. I may need to do a little vestibular, a little neurological, and any other information I need, I refer out. And I get the data and I design the program, the system, I should say, based on the individual's needs. Well, what about rating lifestyle? Now, that may sound familiar to you. First of all, rating movement was new to people in Asheville. So I did presentations about the importance of assessing. And people came to the presentation. They were pretty new to it back then, 2009, 2010, when I began the campaign of my new service. And it made sense. Why don't we rate you? And you have to have a minimal rating in order to move. If you don't meet the criteria, then your chances for injury go up, basically. So we need to rate your movement. Now I'm skipping ahead to principle number 4 here. If you look at principle number 4 is how we move, right? So we rate your movement, and I use a couple different concepts based on the various and the diverse background that I have in education. But basically, I like the idea where I'm using movements and then rating each movement. And if they have pain, there's a comprehensive assessment. And if they don't have pain, it's basic. But both of those individuals, whether they're going to a comprehensive approach or a basic approach, they need to get rated. And the rating needs to go up based on their goal. So what I'm getting at is rating. And then what about wellness? I thought, well, they have ratings for blood pressure. So there are baselines. There are baselines for movement. There are baselines for posture. When I do a posture assessment on someone and I'm looking at when I'm looking at these imbalances, I'm looking to see how far off the norm they are. There's a normal for a low back curve. There's a norm for an upper cervical curve. There are baseline numbers that I'm looking for. And then, of course, if they're forward in front of the plumb line, or if they have too much of an arch in their back, or their head is too far forward, then we know that they're not meeting the baseline. Well, it's the same thing with health. You have a baseline for blood pressure. And if you're outside the baseline, you're at risk. You have a baseline for cholesterol. You have a baseline for blood sugar, and so on and so forth. Well, I thought, well, why don't we simplify it? Why don't we just get a wellness rating and a movement rating? And I can do that subjectively and objectively. Subjectively, I just ask questions and then I rate it. So if I created a questionnaire, and as you go through the questionnaire and you fill out each section of the four principles: emotional health, biochemical health, nutritional health, and physical health, you're basically just filling out questions. And based on your answers and the score is going to land you somewhere on this rating scale. And I created a rating scale. I created the rating scale, but the algorithm was created by a student of mine, a mentoring student of mine. And if it's high, then we need to bring those numbers down. So at least we have people like visuals. People like to know, where am I at? So if they can see it, and later on I can physically see it. So if they fill out a 7-day food diary and a sleep log, then we're getting two things here. So you're going beyond answering questions. Now I'm getting an intake. So they like that. And then when I watch you move, if you can't touch your toes, that's a certain rating. Or if you lose your balance on one foot, that's a certain rating. And if you can't meet the capacity requirements, that's another rating. And everything's rated based on age and all that. But at the end of the day, what I started to find at the beginning when I started rating this was that emotional health was always about the highest. I'd say about 70 to 80%. That was the leading factor. Of course, if you came in with pain, that was high, of course. But I would always see that when the other ratings, when I brought those down, the physical health rating always got better, because you're going to learn that the four principles, the reason why the little body image is in the middle is because they all intersect with the body, because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I'm quoting Aristotle's. So these body systems are interconnected and dependent upon one another to function. This is a holistic system of systems. So besides the fact that in the last 20 years, I've been looking at the body as a cybernetic bioelectric magnetic organism, so going way beyond how I used to look at the body in the 90s, but it always was an integrated multi-dimensional system of systems. You have all these systems and they all interplay with one another. So if you have flexibility challenges, when somebody says, well, maybe all I need are mobility exercises. I said, yeah, but why are you tight? What's the why behind it? There's a lot of different reasons why muscles are short and tight. Yes, it's pretty obvious that if your posture's out of balance, if you have one of these three common muscle imbalance syndromes, yeah, you have short and tight muscles, and then you have long and weak muscles in this example. But my question is why? And some of it isn't so cut and dry. Some of the reasons why our muscles are tight have to do with other functions in the body. They may have to do with organs. All right. They may have to do with your sleep-wake cycle. They definitely may have something to do with your emotional stress levels. But what I'm saying here is rating it. And then we have a baseline, and then we look at feeling well first. So my clients say, well, I'm coming to you with a low back problem. And I said, well, first of all, you don't have a back problem, you have a body problem. There's a lot of reasons why your back hurts. And my clients that I've seen since 2000, well, since the beginning, but basically between 2009 to current, have come to me with difficulties. So, and I will always say I never work alone. I've always had a team. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I've got some very challenging cases, but I work in concert with other practitioners. I integrate my approach. Here's the bottom line. They've been to orthopedics, they've been to physical therapy, they've tried yoga, they've tried personal training, a whole slew of different systems and concepts and methods. Nothing against any one of them. You know, they're all there for a benefit, but they didn't stay well because what was missing wasn't the concept itself. It was that reductionist approach to trying to fix one part of the body when there were multiple systems broken down at the same time. The reductionist approach that goes all the way back in medicine. You know, what do? They treat the symptom. They don't, you know, you go see this specialist and that specialist and that specialist. I kind of get it, but I kind of don't. Why don't they all just communicate? Because the body's an integrated multidimensional system of systems. One system always knows what the other is doing. There's no separation of it. What the four principles started out to be were the four secrets. So right about 2012, I came up with the four secrets. I'm like, that's it. I got to make this easy. I'm going to make them the four pillars of all my services. The success of my clients is based off of these four secrets. And then that later became the four principles in 2015 when I rebranded my service and we came up with this logo. And the image in the middle made sense. And the graphic design person said, that's perfect, Brian, because what I'm understanding, what you're explaining, is that all of these principles intersect in my body. So, yes, you have a body problem. And when I address the body that way, whether my client had pain or not, when we looked at their emotional stress, their sleep, digestion, of course, if I looked at their movement, I could see where their imbalances are. When I looked at the three principles, I found where the challenges were. So let's say you have unresolved lower back pain. So I will tell you off the bat that the mystery is somewhere in your history, somewhere in your lifestyle and your health history. I can come up with where and why this is happening. And that's what I want to do. I want to get to the cause for you, uncover the mystery in your back pain history, if you will. What if it's unspecific? What if nobody can figure it out? Now, I have had cases like that. Now, luckily, the functional nutritionist and functional neurologist and the chiropractor all in one, that's one person. We had a lot of tough cases. I had people coming through my door of my facility and they were presenting with some really tough ones and we figured it out. So let's go through this real quick. Let's look at each one of these. Emotional health. I mean, how do we handle stress? Now, there are various types of stressors on the body. There's emotional stress. If you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, if you're dehydrated, if you have poor posture. There's also electromagnetic stress, which is recently something I've been adding to my questionnaire. It isn't even on the rating right now. I got to redo that because in the last 15 years, because of the increased use of technology and all the EMF and ELFs and all the other radio waves in the air, this is affecting our biochemistry. Your body's bioelectric, so it's affecting your electrical field. This is all new to people. This isn't something that was taught in any school I went to other than the Czech Institute. But what we're talking about is how are you managing your mind? Stress, whether it's electromagnetic, whether it's lack of sleep, whether it's mismanaging our daily stressors. Your body's under a high amount of stress, whether we're talking heat, electromagnetic, emotional stress, nutritional stress. Those stressors are lowering your immune function. It does a lot of other things too, don't get me wrong. But immune function is, we need that to fight illness. And if you're coming to me with an injury, you need your immune system and your hormonal system to repair the body. And if that's not being managed, if we don't have some way to mitigate your fight to flight, everybody know what that means? If we don't have some way to mitigate that on a daily basis, then it's going to be an uphill battle. Thoughts are really things. Dr. Candace Pert discovered beyond a shadow of a doubt. As our feelings change, this mixture of peptides travel throughout your body and your brain, and they literally change, and they're literally changing the chemistry of every cell in your body. Thoughts are things, ladies and gentlemen. And most people have about 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day, and 80% of them are negative. Just, be self-aware sometime. Notice if you're with somebody or with yourself, when something doesn't go right, or at the drop of a hat, how fast we are to self-criticize. Thoughts affect organs and organs affect tissues. Have you ever heard someone say, or the old saying is, the issue is in the tissue? So the emotional traumas that I had were stuck in my tissues, and that's a scientific fact. Just look up any of the work by John Barnes, myofascial therapist. Your fascia is a crystalline network that receives and transmits information, and it stores information. Your body's electrical, even right down to your bones, are piezoelectric. So brains, organs, and tissues. So you see here the spinal column, and then we look at the keys on the piano, and these segments in your spine are neurologically linked to these organs. And so when your spine is out of alignment, or let's say, for instance, here we have stomach number 3, and you have an upset stomach, that may throw off that vertebrae. But if energy going through an organ, like think of caffeine in your adrenals, is too high for optimal functioning, the organ overheats. The organ will dump the excess energy into the muscles it shares direct neurological relationship with. Your muscles and your organs and your nervous system and your bones and everything's hardwired together, like your computer. I may have different systems. I may have a Word program and a PowerPoint, but I can integrate in a moment's notice. I could drag things from my Word right into my PowerPoint presentation, although they're two separate systems. And when we have this high energy, think of each segment like a circuit breaker. So if you plug too many things into a light socket down here, 3, 4, 5, 6, so you're eating the wrong foods, you're getting upset, and you're creating all this, this derangement in your stomach, that's going to overload that tissue, and your brain is always going to protect the organ first. So it'll shunt all the excess energy into the tissues around it. I'll tell you, when I started to really rate sleep, nobody was sleeping. And even to this day, when I look at an audience and I ask people, how many people, go to bed after 10:30? So the hands go up. How many people go to bed by midnight? Hands go up. How many people have a hard time falling asleep? Hands went up. How many people wake up between 1 and 4 o'clock? And I don't mean just to pee, because if you got to get up and pee and you go back to sleep, that's normal. You got to eliminate. But if you get up 2 or 3 times or 4 times to pee, well, that's a different issue. But if you can't fall back to sleep, or you just wake up, you can't fall back to sleep, then we got an issue. And the issue's in your tissue. But this is a normal circadian rhythm. How many of you want to live longer? A lot of us do. We want a quality of life. That was my goal. Now I'm 63. My dad died at 61, my mother at 47. So I have a better quality of life than he did. because the quality of his life towards the end wasn't that good. So I did my work. I did the homework so I can enjoy my life. I can still exercise. I can still skateboard. I can do a lot of things, but I go to bed when I'm supposed to. When the sun goes down, I wind down. And when the sun gets up, I get up and I spend time with God. But the point is, this is what we see. So we're not getting the hormones we need. So if you look here between 3, 6, and 10, this is when your body's producing the hormones you need to get to sleep and to build. So you're coming to me, my clients come to me with an injury. And they're not going to bed till 11:30 at night. And they'd have a real poor eating plan. Well, they don't have the repair time needed. And this is when my clients would say, well, nobody asked me about my sleep. I said, you went to all these people for your back pain and nobody was considered the fact that you're going to bed at 11:30, and you're cutting out a lot of proper repair time. If you're not getting proper repair, then we'll talk about, do you have the raw materials to rebuild the tissues, the ligaments, and the muscles, and even the bones? And we're lacking on all of that. Then there's nutritional health, how we digest, what and when we eat and drink. The gut is also the second brain. So going back to psychological repair between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., and our ability to avoid complications with dementia and Alzheimer's and foggy brains and our reaction times and so on and so forth, one of the things we have to look at is cleaning up our gut, especially when it comes to mood. Now, the digestive system and the stabilization system. So this is a pretty big thing for me because I have clients that have had spinal injuries, low back pain, neck pain, hip pain, we'll just say joint pain in general. And the key stabilizers for your spinal column, which will affect your hip, knee, ankle, neck, shoulder, is your inner core. Your inner core stabilizes your spine. Now, I'll elaborate on that in a minute, but I want to make a point here about digestion. So when your organ, going back to that other picture, when your organ is overheated, we can go to this picture here. In the diagram below, you see the enteric nervous system control relationships. The enteric nervous system includes the sympathetic fight or flight and your parasympathetic rest and digest system. It's also linked to your endocrine system, emotions, limbic system, and somatic system for musculature. Visceral health and stability dictate structural stability. What the diagram illustrates is that all these systems integrate into the enteric nervous system, and the communication between them is bidirectional. In the context of the gut, when people experience, for example, abdominal bloating, and they don't feel discomfort or pain in their abdominal wall, it's often because the enteric nervous system has gone into a state of something like amnesia. The reason I mention that is that muscle, when it's overly stimulated, so you got gas, bloating, irritable bowel syndrome, some people have Crohn's disease. There's a lot of reasons why the core can be turned off and get inhibited. And if that gets inhibited, then we got a problem with spinal stability. So every client I see, I assess their inner core. And there's another thing. I've had lots of people, I've had clients that were massage therapists, physical therapists, surgeons, and they said, nobody's ever really assessed my core like you have. And out of all the inner core assessments, 95% of them were failed. They were turned off. I need to get that system back on. And that system can only get rebooted through a manual application. In other words, I need to actually teach you how to activate it And then the repetition of doing that starts to build the memory. And what I'm basically doing is I'm building new software. I'm reprogramming your inner core. All this to say the digestive system, which can also get worked up through emotional stress, can have an effect on your spinal stabilizers. Isn't that interesting? A lot of people don't tie that together. And again, this is why I have the 4 principles. This is why I've created this approach, and this is why it works. And it worked both clinically for people in pain. And of course, I've also found the inner core was turned off in people that don't have pain. And then what are we eating? What are we putting in our body? All these chemicals in all these years, which is accumulative. We need to get these heavy metals out and these toxins out of the body. Sure, your body can handle a certain amount of stress and a certain amount of toxicity. It's called an immune system. But if you overburden the nervous system and you overburden the immune system, which is one and the same, you know, your immune system is a circulating nervous system. So if I use the nervous system as an example, plugging too many things into a light socket, what happens? You can trip your circuit breaker. So then you have a loss of power. If you get too much pollution in the body, what'll happen? You'll get toxic, and that'll affect your nervous system. Well, how do you reduce the neurological stress? Well, we do progressive relaxation, we do mind training, and then we offset that by detoxing the body of chemicals, because the chemicals can also excite the nervous system and the endocrine system. The 4 principles, we get to nutritional health. You're coming to me because you want to run faster, lift more, live longer, get out of pain. And I'm looking at all these principles. This is what we were missing. This is a holistic approach. This is why throughout all the 70s, 80s, and 90s, do we have more people working out than we ever have? Sure. Do we have more sickness than we ever have? Sure. Figure it out. I started asking these questions in the 90s. So we want to eat as organic as possible. And even there, I still clean. I show my clients how to clean these vegetables. Remember, I'm teaching them how to fish. Nobody gave you an operator's manual. You're going to have a wellness plan to follow. And then I coach you along, and eventually you just run it yourself. The animals that you eat, if you're a meat eater or fish or whatever, you got to get, free range, cage free, real cage free chickens, grass fed, hopefully grass finished beef with no vaccines. All right. Why is this guy wearing this suit? All right. Just, you know where I'm going with this. And then when we're eating, we have all this blood sugar imbalance. People are not eating right for their metabolic type. They're eating too late in the evening, and they're saying, I can't go to sleep. I go, well, you're eating the wrong food. It's later in the day. You're drinking coffee too late in the day. Your body's too acidic. You're eating too much at night. Your body's converting that to fat, blah, blah, blah. So when are we eating, and how do we balance this out so that we don't have blood sugars highs and lows? We have more diabetes now than we ever have. But we have all these different diets and all these different programs. But either way we look at it, we've had all of these different programs, but yet we have all these unhealthy people. And then the water. The first 2 things I teach my clients is how to breathe, because you got to, oxygen is the number 1 thing we need for survival. And then water. We're all dehydrated, and that creates problems. And we need that water for electricity because it's a transducer of electricity. Your Your discs need it, your bones need it, your nerves need it. Every time you blink, every time you take a breath, and you breathe over 25,000 breaths a day, you need water. Make sure it's clean, it's purified, and it's got to be structured. That's why I ask my clients to add a little pinch of sea salt to their water. And you got to drink half your body's weight in ounces because you use so much water. You think, you blink, you cry, you laugh, you run, you talk, you breathe. All of that uses water. And then we're not assessing movement. It's not about muscles. It's not about the reductionists and we're going to look at your back and you have a hamstring problem and you got to go see this specialist. I restore the whole pattern, the whole system. So if you're coming to me with a shoulder issue, then I need to look all the way down the chain, the kinetic chain, they call that. Well, do you think we have an issue here? And the two leading predictors to injury is a previous injury and muscle imbalance syndromes. So are you getting assessed? I've worked with a lot of people that got hurt while exercising. With all the advancements in orthopedic medicine, physical and occupational therapy, all the schooling and advanced studies in medicine, advancements in medical technology, and more personal trainers, why are we still seeing an increased risk to these injuries? There's the 10 musculoskeletal health risk factors. Look at number 6 again. Exercise is like medicine. So you come to me and I do a rating, and your emotion rating's high, your nutrition rating's high, and your biochemical rating's high, but you don't have any pain, let's say, your physical rating's okay. But you're on the verge of an injury or a health problem. Or maybe your performance is lacking. We're running slower. I'm getting weaker. I'm not recovering the way I should. And I just look at your lifestyle. I look at where your stress levels are, electromagnetic too. I got to add that. How's your sleep? What are you eating? What are you digesting? When are you eating? And then I'll look at your movement. And I'll look at your posture. You probably have if you have tight muscles, that's draining you. If your muscles aren't responding the way they should, like your core stabilizers, that's affecting your muscle performance. Because if you're prescribing the wrong exercise, it's like giving the person the wrong medication for the wrong symptom. We got to be careful. I'm very, very careful, especially if you're coming to me with a challenge. I got to make sure the exercises are designed around what your body can handle and what it needs. So if you have these imbalances, I have to customize the program around that. But let's say you're not sleeping, you have adrenal stress, and your nervous system is ramped up. Well, now I really got to make sure that whatever exercise I give you, it doesn't overstimulate your nervous system. Meanwhile, we're working on your lifestyle factors to bring those ratings down so that I can increase the level of difficulty, intensity of your exercise and get you back to what you want to do. Maybe you want to get back to tennis. Maybe you want to get back to your sport. Maybe you got to get back to work. Or maybe you just want to get back to living life the way you want to and being able to stand, sit, push, pull, lunge, twist without seeing the chiropractor 3 times a week. And then there's spinal conditions. I got to rule those out. Did you know that 76% of the population is walking around with an undiagnosed bulging disc? This is based on a study that was done in 1995. And basically what it shows is in an age, sex, and risk factor matched group of asymptomatic individuals, disc herniations had a substantially higher prevalence, 76%, than previously reported in an unmatched group. They were on the verge of it. That's why you get assessed first. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the core, most misunderstood muscle groups. I always have to straighten people out on this. Now, it isn't your fault, but if I'm speaking to a professional and they don't know what an inner core unit is, then I'm perplexed. The public, I understand, they think that the core is right where the ribs are. And sure, that's where the middle of your core is, and that's just your outer core. And you have an upper core, middle core, and a lower core. And same with the back, and your glutes are part of your core. The muscles that raise your knees up, these muscles here. You stand on one leg and you raise your knee up in the air and you're balancing on the other foot, that's using your hip flexor. That's part of your core. Your diaphragm that you breathe with is part of your core. So that's just your outer core. And it does help to stabilize you. It's a secondary stabilizer. They call it a growth stabilizer. It helps you to move. So if you're going to throw a ball or kick a ball, okay, if you're going to push something, you got to use your core. But if you have a spinal condition, your inner core is turned off, and that might be because you have digestive issues. Your inner core might be turned off because you had a child. When you're in that much pain during labor, it turns off your core. If you have abdominal pain, it'll turn off your core. If you fall on your butt and hurt yourself, that will turn off your core. But your inner core is different than your outer core. And it responds differently. And it reflexes differently. It's also timing is different. Timing. So when you throw a ball, the minute you initiate that throw, your inner core is supposed to reflex before your outer core does, because it's providing stability to the spine, and your spine, if not, is naked. So imagine if that reflex didn't, it didn't wrap around, because that's what your inner core does. See how it wraps around your body? So this is your belly button where the red arrow is. Here's your spine. And when your inner core reflexes it like a belt, it creates hoop tension around your spine. If that doesn't reflex on and you're running and kicking and picking up things and over and over and over, your spine is naked. You have no stability. It's like, imagine you got a flatbed truck and you're going to move your furniture. You stuff everything on the truck, but you don't tie it down. You're going over bumps and everything. Your shit's going to start flying out the back of the truck because you don't have it harnessed down. Well, that's how your spine gets beat up. So when I see a set of x-rays and I see degeneration and slippage and bulging disc, I'm like, well, that core hasn't been turned on for a long time. What happened? Well, why didn't it, why wasn't it turned on? And can you get it turned back on? Yeah, I can reboot it. That's why the whole first phase of my system is all reprogramming restoration. Reprogramming. Your body's a computer. Brain is a CPU, software. So every time I give you an exercise to go home and do for 5-6 days in a row, you do 10 reps, you're writing new software. You're building a new program. So assessing, screening, and restoring movement, and not just muscles. Reprogramming. And you can only build a house on a strong foundation. And if you want to build performance, you got to start with the inside, the sub-foundation, and then get to the base. And then off of there, you build performance, and then you build skill if you're an athlete. I rate movement. If you got pain, then I have a comprehensive approach. So I do posture assessments, vestibular, spinal curve, comparative joint range of motion, flexibility test, selected functional movement assessment. That's this here. Everything's ranked and rated. Static core function test and applied kinesiology. Get your rating, lower the rating, clear the assessment, get you on to the next phase. The next phase would be, so here you are, you clear it, and then you want to get out, you want to get back to your sport, your other stuff. Well, then you got to go and get ready for that. So I take you to a functional movement screen. If you're coming to me with no pain, I start with the functional movement screen. I still look at posture, but the functional movement screen still rates movement. It's a little bit more aggressive. And there's baseline, and I won't get into all that in this video. But posture assessment, comparative joint range motion, flexibility test, functional movement screen, static and dynamic core function test, applied kinesiology. And as you clear that, the level of difficulty goes up, and they usually get back to their sports pretty quick, their stuff pretty quick. And because if you don't have pain, it's pretty easy to bring your rating up. Got to earn your rite of passage to get back to play. We don't second guess. They go through these assessments. They do the 4 principles. Does that mean they'll never get injured and never have a problem? No. That just means they'll respond better. They recover faster. And they take care of themselves better. And I don't work alone. And I have a step-by-step process. So knowledge is power. Now that you know, this is why I came up with the 4 principles. If they're in balance, you're in balance. If you're living your life in balance, you can live longer and you will feel better. And you have to feel well to move well, and you have to move well to move more. In closing, that's the 4 principles that I came up with. You have the history, why it was necessary. You can honestly see now in this day and age, just look around you and, do you have unresolved back problems and tightness, and do you have digestive issues? And just think about it. Look at the wellness issues that we're dealing with today. I hope this helps. And if you are interested, I do offer a free discovery virtual call where I just kind of go over your history. So I will ask you some questions. But if you'd like to go down the rabbit hole and get to the cause of your challenges, contact information will be located at the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this. My name is Brian Schwager, once again, the founder of Wellness Movement Services, saying, have an empowering day. Thank you so much. Be well. Bye for now.